Hey pal, it's me again. I hope you're doing well. I am back with another playlist rotation video, this time for the month of August. Just going to be talking about the music that I have been bumping for the last month or so. Going to be talking about the new releases I've been listening to, older stuff that I've been circling back to, and just new genres that I have been getting into. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with the new releases, we have Beabadoobie's new album, This Is How Tomorrow Moves. I have been a fan of Beabadoobie since the pandemic, so 2020. I first got into her by listening to her Fake It Flowers album, which I thought was amazing. A great indie rock album, if you haven't listened to it. She then followed it up in 2022 with her album Beatopia, which is just as good, if not a step up from her last album. Since then, I feel like she's soared in popularity since her 2022 release, and which leaves us with her 2024 release, This Is How Tomorrow Moves. Now, I'll be honest, I've been a huge fan of Beabadoobie. She's one of my favorite artists. I think she was one of my most listened to artists in 2022. But I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy this album as much as I enjoyed her last two albums. It's still a great album. She's still very talented with songwriting and everything else, but I just felt like this album wasn't as cohesive to listen to as her other two albums. With that said, it does give her an opportunity to display more of her versatility, since there's quite a few different songs that change in genre and tone. I personally just wasn't a huge fan of that direction that she took, but there's still a couple songs that I enjoyed off this album. Me personally, I just wish she wrote like 10 albums that sounded like California. To me, California is like one of the best songs she's written, so that's just me though. Moving on, we have an album by another one of my favorite artists, and that is Memoirs in Armor by the rapper Navy Blue. Now, I don't really listen to a whole lot of hip hop music anymore, but abstract rap is what I listen to the most, and Navy Blue, I think after this album, has cemented himself as my favorite rapper. The beat selection is really, really amazing. On all his songs, he has great beats, great uses of samples and loops, and a lot of the times he doesn't even have drums on his songs, which I think just adds to the uniqueness of his songs. He's not rapping about like pills and guns and money and chains and all that. That's just like not really something I'm into, but he is a very like introspective rapper. He talks about his feelings, his emotions, the tribulations he has to cross with himself, and certain addictions he's gone through. It's just a very different type of rap music. He has like almost this spoken word delivery. It's almost like poetry, but he throws it on some of the nastiest beats you'll ever hear. I first got into him. He was a feature on Earl Sweatshirt's album, Some Rap Songs. And through osmosis, I just kind of started listening to him, I think back in 2022, maybe? And that's just really when I started to dive deep in his discography and have been a fan ever since. So if you're looking for a change of pace with rap music, kind of sick of the modern trap and hip hop that has been on Rap Caviar a lot lately, definitely check out Navy Blue. All right, up next is a single by a kind of underground artist by the name of Julia Wolf. This is her latest single, Life is a Storm. Now, it's kind of like a sad, emo, rock type of song, but I think her vocals and the rock production are just come together beautifully. First got into her just a few months ago, actually, through TikTok, and her other release that she dropped this year called In My Room. I listened to that song over and over and over again, so these are the only two songs that I have listened to from her, but she has, I think, an album or two out already. Pretty emotional rock, I would say. Her songs are such a vibe, it's kind of hard to describe. I haven't really heard anything like her that's coming out today, so definitely have been bumping this song quite a bit. Next up is an album that came out just a few days ago, so I haven't listened to it a ton, just a few times, and that is Code Derivation by Robert Glasper. Now, if you've never heard of Robert Glasper, he is an Grammy award-winning pianist who is one of like the front runners of modern jazz music. This is actually the first album I've listened from him though, and he did not disappoint. I first heard about him actually through an interview he did. I forget which radio station, but the interview was basically about him shitting on Lauryn Hill and how much of a nightmare she is to work with. That just kind of opened my eyes up, and I saw a lot of his personality in that interview, and I already have heard the name before and knew that he had won some Grammys. And yeah, when I saw he dropped this album literally a few days ago, I thought I'd give it a try, and I was not disappointed. This is some of the best jazz music I've listened to in the past few months. If you're a fan of jazz-influenced hip-hop, like Tribe Called Quest or J. Cole or Kendrick Lamar, you should definitely listen to this album, because what he did was write a handful of jazz songs with his band that are incredible to listen to. Again, some of the best jazz I've listened to this year. And what he did was he took each one of those songs and gave it to his hip hop producing friends and his rapping friends. And he told them to sample it and flip it and make their own hip hop song out of it. So the album is his jazz song and then the hip hop flipped version of that. And it just keeps going like that, and it's really, really fun to listen to. Hip hop has such a strong backbone with jazz music, so it's like, it fits so well. It's so appropriate that this approach to jazz music is something that's really fun and entertaining, and something I've had a lot of fun with. So if you're a fan of jazz hip hop beats, it's really interesting to see, after listening to a jazz song, listening to how these producers and rappers approach that in a brand new way. It's really interesting. I highly recommend you listen to it. And I'm still listening to Charm by Clairo. I mentioned her in the last video, but goddamn, this is probably still my favorite album of this year. It's such a good album. I don't have anything more to say than I said in my last video, but just want to let you know that is still in the rotation heavy. All right, moving on to older albums that I've kind of been circling back to. There wasn't a whole lot of new music this month that I was really excited about. So I decided just to go back into my catalog and kind of revisit some older albums that I've loved to listen to before. And the first one I've been really listening to, and I kind of forgot how good this album was. It is Brutalism by The Drums. I've been a big fan of The Drums since 2020. I think I got into them around the pandemic. And this album from start to finish, hands down, is a masterpiece. I actually first got into The Drums from a feature they were in with Kyle and Trippie Redd. I think the song was like called Forget or something, but I remember loving that song and I was like, The Drums, like never heard of them before. So I did some research, found this album, and was hooked ever since. I always try to do a little bit of research to see where the band's from, how long they've been around, maybe dip into their discography a little bit after finding them. And this is kind of an interesting story. So they've been around since 2010, I believe, and they started with, I think, 3 members. There have been some members that have come in and out, but basically since 2016, the frontman, Johnny Pierce, has been the only member of the band. So for years now, Johnny Pierce has still held on to the name The Drums, but he's literally the only one in the band doing all of the instrumentation, lyrics, and vocals for this band. I don't even know if you can call that a band anymore, but I just thought that was really interesting that he still kept on to the name of The Drums, but is totally solo now. But anyways, if you've gone through a breakup, just listen to this album. It's gonna hit you right in the feels. Or if you're in a steady relationship or happy being single, still listen to this album. This album is full of great songs. Honestly, this is an album that I listen to all the way through, so this whole track list is amazing. Moving on to the next album I've been listening to. It's Anako by Jason. I remember when this album just first came out, I was just drawn to the cover art and I listened to the album, got introduced to this artist, Jason, and again, hooked immediately. Every single song on this album is amazing. If you ask me which is my favorite, I'd probably give you a different answer depending on what day of the week it is. A masterclass in chill indie rock. Literally one of my favorite albums ever, I think. A lot of fond memories during the time I first listened to this album. Again, this was This album came out in 2019, so listening to this through COVID, and I remember this album being a part of a lot of memories, so this holds a special place in my heart. Moving on to another one of my favorite bands is Crumb. I've talked about them in the last video with their latest album. This is their 2019 release, Jinx, another one that's just from start to finish, amazing record. I listened to this record in full, and I have been for the last few weeks. One of my favorite albums. Again, this came out in 2019. Through COVID, I was listening to it a lot, so this is another album that I have a lot of memories associated with. Definitely like chill, psychedelic, indie rock, and I've definitely noticed that their new album is a lot more fast-paced than this 2019 release, so it's kind of good to go back and forth between them just to kind of see the range of one of my favorite bands. Next up is probably my favorite artist ever, and that is Decide by DJO. I think that's how you say it. I'm sure you've heard of him by now, but this is Joe Keery from Stranger Things. He is one of the best artists working right now in the industry, and he had his song End of Beginning, which I'm sure you've heard, blow up on TikTok in a way that I don't think I've ever seen any song blow up on TikTok before. It was crazy. It was everywhere, big. This was a huge song, but it came a few years after this album came out. So I had already been listening to this album, been in love with that song for over a year before it really blew up. And yes, the gatekeeping part of me was really upset that that song blew up, because I wanted to have this artist as a secret of mine that nobody else knew. But that is why I'm doing these videos, to kind of let that part of me go and share all of the wonderful music that I have been listening to. So yes, I was upset at first when he kind of just blew up overnight with the trend of his End of Beginning song, which is still an incredible song. But I feel better now that a lot more people know him. I first started listening to him, I think in 2021 with his 2020 release, 2020. And if you haven't listened to that album, go back and listen to that, because that is another beautifully produced album. And yeah, I've just been listening to him ever since. He was my #1 listened to artist of 2022, and this album, Decide, had a lot to do with that. And the last artist I have kind of been getting back into was Pinegrove. Now, over the last week or so, been diving into their catalog. I really only knew one song by them, and that was Need To, which was another song that kind of blew up on TikTok. That was the Pinegrove Shuffle song that everyone was doing for a while. I fell in love with that song. I tracked it down pretty easily on TikTok, and I found the band Pinegrove. But a few weeks back, I stumbled upon their Tiny Desk concert and just fell in love with the vocals and their performance and the songs that they were singing. So like within the past week, I've literally just gone back to this compilation and listened to all of their music up until 2015. So Need To is on that compilation. Need is on that compilation. Angelina, New Friends. There's so many great songs on there. And yeah, I've been listening to them a lot. Moving on, just a few different genres that I have been kind of diving into lately. The first one is breakcore. That's kind of a pretty obscure subgenre of electronic music. It's very fast-paced electronic dance music with pretty crazy drums. I don't really know how to describe it, and I would play some, but I don't want to get copyrighted. Just look up breakcore if you're in the mood for something that's very electronic based. There is definitely a large use of sampling, I would say, in that genre of music. Maybe you've seen songs that fit that genre on like old video game edits. Like I've seen a lot of breakcore songs on like Sonic the Hedgehog games from like the old Sega in the 2000s and the 90s video games. Just something I have to put on in the background, whether I'm working on something or writing something. It's just like an instrumental music that is high energy and can kind of get me moving and get me motivated. The next genre that I've been getting into lately is probably the opposite of that. It's vaporwave. If you know like the lo-fi beats to study music, it's that, but like 80s sounding synth music that has a bit of an ambient element to it. It's definitely like slower, retro sounding synth instrumentals. It's often associated with like retro futurism too as an aesthetic. It's kind of rooted in that 80s nostalgic feel, but it's also really reliant on like the future and future technology and like the Matrix and computers and the relationship between like humans and technology. I feel like that's kind of like the underlying aesthetic to vaporwave. There's tons of multiple hour-long compilations on YouTube. Sometimes I'll just throw that on again when I'm working on something and need something playing in the background. But I've been trying to look on Apple Music for other playlists to just kind of filter what my favorite songs are and to make my master vaporwave playlist. So those are the new subgenres I have really been getting into lately. And with that said, I think that's gonna do it for this video. If you made it this far, I would really appreciate it if you liked this video. A like goes a long way because I am a new small channel. So tell the algorithm that you wanna see more of me, please. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future videos from me. With that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.